So welcome everyone. We have 6 presentations today. That means that approximately every 15 minutes. If the presenter is, guess what? I'm Susan Squires and I'm chairing this, which means that I'm basically a glorified timekeeper, right? So I'll be I'll be presenting folks and keeping track of time. There's 6 presentations, 1 online, the rest of them here, and we have 1 substitute individual who will be presenting, which I will talk about when that happens. This is a session on governance. We're having a plenary tomorrow on governance, and we're going to have 2 more sessions, a paper session and also First Nation perspective on governance. So I think this is an important central topic to getting things right. So I'm going to start, as I said, 15 minutes per presentation. If the full 15 minutes aren't used, we'll take a question or 2. Otherwise, let's hold our questions till the end. Thank you. So the first presentation is Courtenay E, who is presenting on integrating social benefits into fisheries studies. Thank you.
I think I'm going to have to speak loudly. Does this microphone actually work? Can you hear me at the back of the room? Yeah. Okay. So my name is indeed Courtenay E. I'm a research scientist with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and I was hired in 2021 for that role. And prior to working with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, I was an Ocean Frontier Institute postdoctoral fellow, working with Dr. Paul Foley, who's at the back there, at Grenfell campus at Memorial University. And as part of my postdoctoral fellowship, I did research with sub-module project I-1, which focused on access to resources and markets. And as part of that, I had an opportunity to collaborate with several colleagues, including Dr. Maria Andrea Lopez Gomez, who is also here, I believe. Well, now he's doing his PhD student Riam Mia, Dr. Charles Mather, who's also at the back there, and Dr. Rob Stevenson. And together we co-authored a paper with this title, Full Spectrum Sustainability and a Theory of Access, Integrating Social Benefits into Fisheries Governance. It was recently published in Journal of Marine Policy. And this presentation today is based on that paper, in addition to a March 2022 entry in the OFI governance newsletter. Whoop. Okay. So getting governance right is one of the 6 main topics around which this small scale fisheries Congress is organized. And getting governance right connects to the goals of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which aims to inspire the science community, policymakers, the private sector, and civil society to think beyond a business as usual approach to aspire for real change. A key objective of the decade is to identify and to pursue solutions that meet the sustainability goals, including SDG 14, which is to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, the seas, and the marine resource for sustainable development. And one of the targets for this goal is 14B, which is to provide access for small-scale artisanal fisheries to marine resources in markets. The work that we did focuses on SDG 14, but it also touches on several other of the SDGs, and those include 3, 5, 8, 11, 12, and 10, 11, and 12. At the national level, oceans policy are also being confronted with addressing concerns around the distribution of access and benefits to coastal and Indigenous people and communities. And as a result, managers are facing a growing agenda with a more diverse set of objectives, increased governance considerations, and with changing and conflicting priorities. So there is widespread acknowledgement of a need for a deeper integration of diverse knowledge, goals, societal considerations across disciplines and domains into management in order to achieve sustainability. However, contemporary management approaches remain dominated by the natural and the physical sciences. And as a result, there's been a significant lack of capacity to integrate the human dimensions into governance and management processes in order to achieve sustainability. Additionally, methods for analyzing access and benefits in the context of sustainability frameworks are lacking. Excluding social science analysis and evidence about processes around the distribution of access and benefits from fishing governance is an urgent problem that does need to be addressed. And the inability to incorporate economic, social, governance, cultural, and in addition to the ecological considerations has led to a failure to achieve a diverse set of objectives that have been identified in legislation and policy and agreements, and it's led to a further loss in confidence of the management system. Where the impact of access policy regimes on community benefits have gone untracked, they've had unanticipated and unintended consequences. And one very sort of well-known example is individual transferable quotas. So as a group of co-authors, we were interested into responding to this challenge of bringing diverse social science frameworks into applied governance analysis. And more specifically, we were interested in understanding how to get governance right in relation to the distribution of access and benefits. To do this, we began by examining the full spectrum sustainability framework that was developed by the Canadian Fisheries Research Network between 2010 and 2016. The benefit of this framework is that it includes social, cultural, economic, and institutional, in addition to ecological candidates and indicators. As you can see up on the slide here, the ecological dimension includes a general objective and indicators around the distribution of access and benefits, which focuses on allocation, equitable trading relationships, equity and fairness, and the distribution of access and benefits and intergenerational equity. The economic dimension also includes general objectives and indicators around regional economic benefits to the community, including which includes the perspective of place of fishing within the regional economic development, such as employment, income, human capital, and labor. And it also includes synergies with other sectors, such as tourism, through the integration of regional community resources. But missing from this full spectrum sustainability framework is the articulation of a broad range of factors that either enable or hinder the ability of individuals and communities to not only access, but to benefit from that access. To deepen into extended consideration of access and benefits into a full spectrum sustainability framework, and to develop methods to more systematically assess and to track how access and benefits are distributed, we adapted this full spectrum sustainability framework by integrating the analytical insights of Jesse Rebo and Nancy Peluso's 2003 theory of access. So Rebo and Peluso argue that property is only one factor that in a larger set of relations that impact the flow of benefits from resources such as fishery. And this emphasis on the ability to benefit is noteworthy because Rebo and Peluso believe that access on its own is not enough, that it must be matched by the ability to benefit from that access. The ability to benefit, they suggest, is equivalent to power. Power is both the capacity of actors to influence the practices and the ideas of others, and it is emergent from and through people. Power is therefore inherent in some types of relationships, but it can also arise either deliberately or inadvertently as a result of social relationships. From this perspective, access is similar to a bundle or to a web of powers, and it can change over time, and it needs to be thought of as part of a larger process. Rebo and Peluso identified several rights-based structural and relational access mechanisms or factors that can be bundled to include to make power. So they include legal, illegal, knowledge, markets, capital, technology, labor, authority, social relations, social identity, and then finally access to the resource itself. So in bringing these two frameworks into conversation, we respond to the social challenge by systematically integrating a social science analysis of how benefits are generated into fisheries governance frameworks. Together, these frameworks create a pragmatic one that can be used by fisheries managers, rights holders, and stakeholders. So in subsequent slides, I'm going to explain to you the immediate uses of this combined framework. In this table, you can see examples of questions that we developed for each access mechanism, which is associated with an objective from the full spectrum sustainability framework. And these questions are not meant to be rigid or limiting, but rather these questions are to operationalize the framework by promoting or by facilitating discussion about how these access mechanisms either enable or hinder the ability of individuals or groups to achieve sustainability objectives as they relate to the distribution of access and benefits. So we conceive of 5 immediate uses of this combined framework in applied settings to integrate social benefits analysis into fisheries governance. And the first is in the development of specific objectives and indicators around access and benefits. And the articulation of specific objectives and indicators are important because they enhance communication, transparency, effectiveness, and accountability in resource management. The second one is to help identify, organize, and to analyze social benefit data. The third is to guide the development of cross-disciplinary representations of a system. So that could be like a interactive framework of a social ecological system. To lay out potential trade-offs, cumulative impacts, and changes to oceans governance. And fifth, to help respond to these national and international objectives around the distribution of access and benefits. So in conclusion, full spectrum sustainability and a theory of access enrich social and economic dimensions of integrated fisheries governance. They reduce the probability of untracked and unanticipated consequences that arise from decisions that are made about access and benefits. If we can get governance right, governance structures and processes can attain equity and fairness in fisheries management decisions. Attaining equity and fairness in the distribution of access and benefits requires better knowledge of who benefits how and through what processes. These combined frameworks move away from this business as usual approach to management and offer a means through which to integrate knowledge about the distribution of benefits to improve governance. And I would like to thank the following people.
We have time for one question. So you want to have a question, otherwise we'll hold it for the end. Our second presentation is by Katia. She comes. So is it FRANGOUDES? All right, and she's going to talk about ecosystem-based management.
Okay. I will try to briefly present what we are doing for get governance right in the English-French channel. No, it's very interesting. So it's a project. It's a bilateral project between France and England and not UK. And we try to deploy an acoustic telemetry network with a lot of receivers in the UK and in France and in Belgium. We have 7 pilot sites, including marine parks and offshore wind farms. My colleague on the natural scientists, they agree that they will follow the standard of equipment compatibility, and they will centralize the data because we have one specific office in Europe, institute in Europe, that they centralize all this data of fish movements. So we selected 4 species It's sea bass, bluefin tuna, pollock, and crawfish. I am sorry, I don't pronounce very well that in English. Why? Because there is a conservation requirement. Because it represents different trophic level, and of course, because there is a high value of this fish, and all of them, they represent a social and heritage value for the local coastal communities. Again, we found the word communities. And you see some sea bass waiting to be taken. The acoustic device will inform the ecological knowledge because it helps to identify the essential habitats and the movement of the fish. And particularly in the offshore wind farms, we put the acoustic device to before the construction, because they are not constructed yet, to see what is going on, and then during the works of the construction works, we will look what it will be the impact on the fish, and then after what is happened. So in our case, we are social scientists, so we just look at what fisher tell us to inform about the ecosystem, the species, and the governance system. The objective by the end is to design a proposal for MBFM plans with the stakeholders and engagement. I forgot to tell you that fisher organization, democratic fisher organization, I will use that now, are participating in the program. And so we done interviews and focus group where we have the fishers, what they think about essential habitats, the seasonality of the fish, how they go fishing, and so on, where they go, the current state of the resource, and why there is a rarefication of the resource, and so on. So all this information was, for the moment, it was mainly used to identify the location and the areas where we will put the acoustic device. It was something that we bargained with the biologists, that we go in the project. If they hear what the fishermen, they will tell us. So some of them. And we have a survey at the end on the social and benefit of this of the ecosystem and on the well-being of fishers and recreational fishing. So MBFM is aiming healthy ecosystem and conservation, at least how in Europe we define it, European Union define it, sustainable fisheries, human activities and job, governance system ensuring both ecosystem and human well-being. And so the project Fish Intel will contribute to this MBFM plans for the 4 species. So what we've done, just briefly, we make the network analysis of the different stakeholders and institutions involved in the Channel Sea. We find out that it was not a surprise anyway, that we have the areas of policy, it's the fisheries management, then we have all the marine conservation, which is the second one, and then we had stakeholders that they are involved in both. Of course, in the first marine fisheries, we have all the fisher organizations and the fisheries authorities and the research organization. In the second, we have what we call the French Office on Biodiversity, who is responsible to manage all the marine protecting areas and specific exclusive reserve, environmental NGOs, and here too, local fisher organization because our fisheries committee, they decided that they can manage MPAs based in their region. So, and at the end, we have the same, not really on the research side, we have also the Museum of Natural History, which is an institution working more on conservation than in fisheries management. So, policies. We have Europe. So, Europe is our at least at fisheries management, because Europe make and also for marine conservation, make the rules, and then member states like France or other places, they have to apply this rule in their national level. Europe also decided introduced in BFM in 2008. Asking for sustainability and so on and so on. For the moment, we don't see too much things to be done. So, on the other hand, Europe asked us to prepare multi-annual plan for regional multi-annual plan. Here is the Western water, which is Channel and Atlantic up to Bay of Biscay. And then we have ICAT, who is responsible to manage the bluefin tuna stocks. And on marine conservation, we have the Habitat Directive, the Bird Directive, we have the Water Frame Directive, the Marine Strategy Directive. We're having all this descriptor and what we have to apply. And then we have the national authorities that they have to manage the fisheries. And of course, all the marine conservation directives we have to do. So in France, in fact, we have the fisheries committees, the fisheries organization, they have the possibility to manage, we have regional and district, but the regional and the national fisheries committee, they have the capacity to manage the resource. So I mean, in the previous session, I heard what the lady from Canadian authorities told us, and I was thinking that we have exactly the same stories that individuals, company, they have to apply for that and that. So we have Simbas. It's one of the species that it was not under the quota system, and this species became an issue because the stock was decreased, and Europe, after a big lobby of the British angler recreational fishers, decided that we have to act. So they decided that with scientific knowledge, they decide that there are two stocks. There is one in Gulf of Biscay and the other in the Channel Sea. So they put different rules for the two sides. And until now, we're still under this regime. And my colleagues, they just discovered that it's not two stocks. It's just only one stock. So fishermen, in a meeting when they told that, fishermen became crazy. They told them, we stop fish Simbas because you told us that we have to take 40 centimeters of individuals and so on. So we stopped the activity, and now you come to tell us that it's the same stock. So it was a big story. For tuna, it's very interesting because we didn't have bluefin tuna in the area, and since the production in Mediterranean with ICAT, it seems that the tuna is coming for holidays to the English waters and go down later. It's got my colleague from Exeter University tell us each time because they're tagging tuna, and so they see the movement of the tuna. And of course, in this area, we are not allowed to fish harvest tuna because it's a forbidden species for all of them. We just gave some quota to young fishermen, to the youngest fishermen of the area. It was the condition given by the fisheries committee. So if we have information from the acoustic devices, we can improve, in fact, what we are doing at regional and more local level. What I want just to tell is that for the crowfish, our fisheries fishermen, because we do have only 3% of women that they are fisher women, and we don't have dairy. They apply since 2008 some measures. They close by their own one area, and this area is closed for fishing, and with the help of the marine protecting area based in this area, they make every year evaluation of the stock, and they look what is going on. We didn't have any crayfish, and now it came, and this year it was the very important production, and it was very good for the fisher. And during our fieldwork, we observed that pollack, it's a species that face difficulties, as the fishermen call it, and which is true. And fishermen claim for more implementation of management rules. And so we hope that our work will contribute, at least for the pollack, to implement some new rules available for the professional fisher and for recreational fishers, because now there is a big conflict as there is illegal fisheries. In fact, pollack is under quota system, and France has a huge amount of quotas of pollack. And as we never reach the quota, we consider that we don't have a problem. And in fact, our research institute, IFAMER, doesn't do any work on this, even at all. We don't have even evaluation of this topic. So that's all what I want to tell.
Does anyone have a question? One question?
Yes,
Yes, go ahead.
can you tell us if Brexit has any impact on the type of work that you're doing between France and
No, because each of us, we are working in our own country, you know, it's a bilateral project, but each of us is working separately. So we have meetings with our colleagues, of course. Not really, but it's the last project we have with with England.
Okay.
On this, because for this type of projects, bilateral project, it's ended because the UK and give money for that.
Okay.
They continue research. Voilà.
All right, our next presentation was going to be by Frédéric Cyr, and Maria Andre Lopez Gomez is going to be presenting for him.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm presenting the work that I co-wrote with Frédéric Cyr. He was supposed to present this. The title of the presentation is The Effects of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Access to Local Seafood in the Magdalen Islands. This short study came about as an idea that Frédéric had because he's from the Magdalen Islands. And he noticed a different trend for 2020 during the pandemic. So we decided to dig a bit more into that. This is part of the ebook, TBTI ebook from that Evan Andrews and Christine Knott are editing, and there's a launch of the ebook tomorrow, so I invite you all to go in the afternoon session. Just to give you a little bit of a background, the Magdalen Islands are in the province of Quebec. They're a small archipelago, and they're in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And the lobster fishery is very productive there. The lobster fishery has been open since 1875, and people here, well, it has a history of low access to groceries, to transportation, to food. There's a lot of cooperatives because they had to invest because the population is only of 10,000 people today, and it used to be 12,000 people then. So they've been very creative in founding a lot of cooperatives. Just to show you here, these are the landings and the value of the lobster fishery in the Magdalen Islands. The landings have been pretty constant. This is from 1875. You may not see the numbers to 2015. This is DFO data. And you can see that the landings were oscillating between 2,000 and 4,000 tons. And then afterwards, recently, they've been over 4,000 tons almost. And this is because licenses were introduced in the 1960s, even though lobster was fished even before the 1960s. Most of the fisheries exported. So from 1930s to the 1990s in the Magdalen Islands, there were a lot of cooperatives, including processing plants. There were about 17 processing plants operating in this small archipelago. And they hired about 670 something workers. They closed, some of them closed, some of them were related with fishers. So a little bit different from what we've heard in other plenaries about Atlantic Canada. And yeah, and today there's only 4 processing plants open. Even though the lobster fishery was thriving from the 1930s to the 1990s, a lot of these was imported. People then, we were able to recover with Frédéric some childhood stories from inhabitants of the Magdalen Islands. They're called Madelinos. They call themselves Madelinos. And they were talking to us that even when in the 60s, they couldn't afford lobster, they would glean. They would go next to the plant and glean for the carapaces because the processing plants would throw out the carapaces for fertilizing. So it was never completely affordable for people in the Magdalen Islands to access lobster. In the 21st century, a lot of mergers, a lot of closures of the fisheries, the groundfish collapse as well. It promoted the closure of cooperatives. So now that's why there's only 4 processing plants and none of them are related to a cooperative. There's been a disinterest in fisheries plant work from locals. There's been claims of labor shortages. There's also been a change in working conditions and expectations of people of where they want to work. We've talked to a couple of people who worked in processing plants, youth, and they were not very happy with the working conditions. This is a quote from one of the workers. Also, the labor shortages came about kind of to, I don't know what to say, the Canadian government inaugurated or initiated the temporary foreign worker program that allows to bring immigrant workers to Canada and work in the processing plants or other sorts of food plants. And it's just temporary work and then they go back to their country. So in 2017, the Magdalen Islands started bringing foreign workers to work in processing plants. Then Frédéric and I went into the literature to look at labor shortages, claims of labor shortages, working conditions of processing plant workers. And there's a lot of literature, also a lot of work from Christine Knott and Emily Rasmussen about rhythms of work, how rhythms of work have changed. Also work from Barb and Nicole on processing plant workers and how conditions have changed and not the best. That you have to work long hours in a very cold environment, etc. So these are the numbers of temporary foreign workers coming into the Magdalen Islands from 2017 to 2021, approximately. We were able to retrieve these numbers from interviews with fish processing owners that they gave to news outlets. This is not us interviewing them. This is just from news articles. So the numbers are increasing. In 2020, there were no temporary foreign workers coming into the Magdalen Islands because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that created this change in the access to local seafood. This number is in 2020, about 100 workers were supposed to come to the Magdalen Islands and work, and they couldn't come. So what processors did was they wouldn't buy imperfect lobsters from fish harvesters, even though fish harvesters would land the lobsters. So they had to think, what can we do with all these surplus of lobster? And so some people were selling directly to locals. There were the processing plants also advertise this imperfect lobster for $4 a pound, $3.75 a pound even. And families of fish harvesters were also boiling and processing at their homes the lobster and putting them on jars to sell. So they reinvented themselves, and people, locals started buying a lot of lobster. Preserving food in the archipelago is very common because they don't have, because of winter reasons, they don't have all groceries coming at affordable prices. So preserving has been their way of life, how they access to fresh food. So they even shipped lobster to people in mainland in Canada, to family members, friends. So we thought that was very interesting. Okay, so I may be missing some things that Frédéric would talk about, but I apologize. I apologize for that. So these are some of the implications. Fishing communities in the Magdalen Islands have difficulties accessing seafood in affordable ways. That happened in the 60s. That continues to happen today. In their diet, they use a lot of lobster, not only live fresh lobster, but also they preserve it and use it in other dishes, sometimes French culture dishes. Seafood locally is processed using foreign workforce under very precarious conditions and then marketed globally. I'm saying very precarious conditions, but we didn't actually interview processing workers. This is from the literature that we found about temporary foreign workers, that they have little rights, that they don't speak English or French. So how is occupational health and safety regulations expressed to workers? Some of them don't have transportation to go get groceries, don't have translators. They live in very close quarters where there's maybe, I know that in the Magdalen Islands, there's sort of like a camp site where 100 people could sleep in bunk beds, no separation. So all these things that play the role, like they're fishing the lobster, but it's being marketed, exported. It brings wealth to the archipelago, but it only brings wealth to, there's only 325 license holders. This could be translated into municipal budgets, like Erin Carruthers talked about. But what about the food? Looking at the lobster as food and not as money. So what type of market is Canada promoting when using maybe precarious employment to increase profits for a few and decrease access to local seafood and decent employment in fishing communities? Which policies need to be in place to avoid high prices as the ones observed in the crab fishery that go from about $70 a pound. So crab fishery is actually, crab is also part of the diet in the Magdalen Islands. And in some of the informal interviews, people mentioned, we don't want the lobster to become like the crab. We want to have access to the lobster. We want to keep having access to the lobster. And I believe, I don't know what the price was for 2021 or 2022, but it skyrocketed compared to 2020. Thank you.
We have time for a question. So you want to have a question? Okay, we'll go on to the, oh, where is it exporting to?
I'm not sure, but probably a US market.
US.
US market, no.
Yes, no. 90%.
I can say that it's the US market. I have a question. How do you gather all these data? Is it a survey or?
No, so we just read news articles and had informal interviews with people in Magdalen Islands. And we also read, well, did a literature review of temporary foreign workers in Canada.
And where they come from, the foreign workers?
In the Magdalen Islands from Mexico, Latin America, and I know Mexico because I heard a lot of Spanish. We didn't apply for ethics or anything to conduct interviews, just went there and
Thank you very much. We have a second presentation on the impact of COVID. Charles now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlie Mather. I work in the geography department at Memorial University. I'm presenting a paper, a co-authored paper on recruitment and retention in Newfoundland and Labrador's fish processing sector. Bob Neese is one of the co-authors, and as is Maria. Where do you go? Maria Lopez Gomez. And then we have two research assistants who have been helping us with this research, Maureen Anonson and Steve Boyce. Okay, so the research problem that we're focusing on is the following. So fish processing in Newfoundland and Labrador generates wealth, income, and opportunities for small enterprises in coastal communities in the province. And I'd ask you to focus on the map. It's a staggering map only because it shows the number of processing plants that exist around the province and how geographically dispersed they are. So it plays a critical role in terms of supporting livelihoods in the province. At the same time, the fish processing sector faces recruitment and retention challenges, and we've heard about these already in some of the earlier sessions. This is due in part due to aging workforce, lack of youth recruitment, seasonal work rhythms, resource uncertainty, and so on. The problem of recruitment and retention has been especially evident in this particular year. There have been large increases in quotas for crab. There are high prices, and there's been a sort of post-COVID recovery and boom, as well as a range of other factors. And this slide, that image on the slide there is a really interesting one because it shows Royal Greenland, which is a fish processing facility in Old Pelican, which is in fact advertising for workers who are living in St. John's and then transporting them to Old Pelican on a daily basis, offering competitive wages and hot meals. So here we have a processing plant, in fact, recruiting in St. John's, picking them up at the Avalon Mall and taking them to work at a fish processing plant. So this problem of recruitment and retention has been discussed for some years now. There's an excellent report called Securing Canada's Fish and Seafood Workforce. It was produced in 2019 by Food Processing Skills Canada and funded by the Canadian Government Sectoral Initiative Program. They identify similar problems to the one we identify. They recognize the wealth that food processing brings to Atlantic Canada, but they recognize at the same time that the industry is at what they call a crossroads. And the crossroads is partly because one of the most daunting obstacles facing the industry is recruiting workers. So this is a crossroads, again, a kind of challenge that the industry faces. In this province, there's a similar kind of crossroads, but we argue that it's more like what people are articulating around the term a tipping point. So in media reports and in some of the interviews, the argument is that the sector is at a tipping point. It's connected mainly to an aging workforce and a lack of recruitment of younger men and women into the sector. So again, we've got a sector both regionally and in the province that appears to be at this sort of threshold of change. So what we focus on in this particular project is the problem of recruitment and retention. The methodology involves a review of published academic literature on fish processing in other locations, The challenge of recruitment and retention in fish processing is one that happens in other places, Alaska, Norway, Iceland, and so on. We look at published reports and documents. We looked at official statistical data on labor. And then very interestingly, in terms of some of the results, we've done interviews with government officials and policymakers, unions, plant owners, and plant workers. And again, our work is funded by a joint grant between the Ocean Frontier Institute and Newfoundland and Labrador's Department of Industry, Energy, and Technology. Okay, so this is a brief profile of what the sector looks like. There are 91 active plants across the province, and again, I add that map in there because I just think it's such a significant one. The fish that's processed includes both wild capture and aquaculture, and there are some retail establishments. The industry employs more than 6,000 workers in the province, and they process 92,000 tons of fish. Obviously, the most important and most significant shift that's happened in the last 30 or so years has been the shift from ground fish to shellfish. But I would stress, and we stress in the work that we're doing, that ground fish remains a really important source of raw material for plants around the province. Okay, so this is a really preliminary presentation of some of the research results, some of our very preliminary research results. It's an ongoing project. We still have months of work, of data to collect and interview material to process. But for this presentation, and we encourage some feedback if you have it, we're interested in two very interrelated questions. The first is we're thinking critically about this idea of a tipping point or crossroads. Okay, so what does it mean to suggest that the industry is at a tipping point? What is the source of this tipping point? What comes after this tipping point or crossroads? And then the second point is, what options are there for addressing the challenges in recruitment and retention that do so in a progressive way? So what are the stakes? Who stands to benefit? And most importantly, who stands to lose out from the various options being proposed that might happen after this tipping point? Okay, so it's important to engage with this idea of tipping point because it's sometimes used to justify a particular argument around how the industry should deal with recruitment and retention challenges. And the argument goes like this: we've reached an inevitable demographic tipping point. It's impossible to attract new workers to the industry, and so the processing sector needs to downsize and rationalize and rely more on temporary foreign workers. And so this is the kind of way in which that tipping point argument then gets translated into how the sector as a whole needs to transform. And one of the things that we've started to think through is how we might trouble that particular argument, how we might, in a sense, contest it or look at its weaknesses, pull it apart a little bit. Okay, so we then, and this is what we're going to do in this particular presentation, is to think critically about this tipping point, and we focus more on recruitment than on retention. So just for your information, it's really about recruitment. And so drawing on our, as I said, very preliminary research, we make 5 interrelated points. So in case I run out of time, I'm going to tell you what the 5 points are, and then if I don't get through them, okay. So the first point is that labor market changes in the fish processing sector are complex, very complex, and there are significant knowledge gaps, and they don't lend themselves to a simple tipping point type of argument. Second, recruitment challenges are variable across the province in terms of scale, in terms of organization, and in terms of geography. Some plants in the province, this is what our research is finding, don't experience recruitment challenges in part through innovations in work organization and structure. The fourth point is that low wages remain a challenge, and this is particularly the case for women. There's a significant gender gap related to fish processing workers that we are in the process of exploring. So we've got the statistical data to show it, but we need to explore that in more detail. We are thinking critically around temporary foreign workers, and we're thinking what kind of solution this represents. And finally, it's not really a kind of troubling, but just to underline how high the stakes are given the dependence of coastal communities on fish processing plants. So this is kind of the 5 points, and I'm not sure I'm going to go through them all, but I'll try. Okay, so this is the labor market changes. So this is some access to information data that we've acquired. It's data on the number of workers in the sector between 2010 and 2021, and it's also broken down by region. Okay, so these are, we think, the best data on the number of workers by region over time. So what they point to is a roughly 1/3 decline in the number of workers during this 10-year period, with most of the decline happening in the eastern region of the province. But at the same time, it raises a series of additional questions. The data only go back to 2010, and they tell us nothing about seasonality, they tell us nothing about incomes, they tell us nothing about occupational pluralism, which came up in the previous section, really important. And these are really key to understanding how recruitment and retention work, and potentially how these vary across regions and plants in the province. They also don't tell us why these regional differences exist. And finally, they suggest that there's been a declining employment overall, and at least short-term high unemployment among plant workers in these areas. So the potential that there was a labor surplus at some point. So who were these workers? Where did they go? Did they move on to other work? Have many aged out of the labor force or left the labor force altogether? The point is, we have many questions about the labor market dynamics that need to be understood, especially in the context of some quite simplified arguments about tipping points. The second point is around variations in recruitment challenges. And we found in some of the interviews we've done with plant managers that there are innovative strategies that some plants are employing to keep workers on for longer periods of time. So some fish processing plants are able to draw on local labor because they operate 30 to 35 weeks per year by buying fish from outside. They emphasize worker training for skills and flexibility. They provide higher wages and medical insurance. They focus on the fuller utilization of the fish. So these are some of the ways in which, again, we can rethink tipping points, but also in contrast to bigger companies that have in the recent past built uni-species plants. And so this is a quote from one of our expert interviews. So they've got a crab plant, a shrimp plant, a groundfish plant. That makes it very difficult to retain workers because they're doing 3 months work, but could easily be doing 6 to 7 months work. That's the downsize of how the industry has developed. So again, you can see how we're beginning to tease apart the idea of a simple tipping point through looking at the different strategies that different plants are using in the province. Okay, so low wages, this has been a constant problem. We're going to just draw on 2 quotes from fish workers that illustrate this problem. So in order to recruit and retain your workers, you've got to have a pension plan, you've got to increase the wages, you have to have sick days, and if you've trimmed £1 million of fish, you should be recognized for it. But this is not happening. And this is a positive one, which is one thing I've got to say about the company. They bend over backwards to protect the health and safety of the employees. They'll come to you and say, how are things going? Do you want to take a break? Do you want to switch to another job? I must say they're good like that. Okay, here's the fourth one, which is around temporary foreign workers. Figures on temporary foreign workers are quite difficult. Recent figures are very difficult to obtain. I know Maria had her presentation, and she mentioned that it came from actual companies. The official data is difficult to obtain, especially the most recent one. But all indications are that in the province, the number of foreign workers in fish plants has increased dramatically. So we know that it started around 2012, but it's really increased dramatically in the recent past. And this is a relatively new and recent development for fish processing in this province. Not so new in Atlantic Canada as a whole, but new for us here in the province. From the perspective of a fish plant, this is the kind of interview material that we're getting. They're fantastic workers, they don't complain. They're not looking to have 3 days off next week. I mean, they're reasonable. So they want to work and they're not particular. I don't mean to downgrade local workers, but it is what it is, right? This is the perspective from a community leader. And you just get the sense that this is a totally different way in which immigrant workers might be integrated into communities. We'd love to bring some foreign workers in. It would bring the community to life, not temporary foreign workers. Immigrants to come and live here, bring them out with their kids, have a family fun day, show them the output. Just because you go to Newfoundland and Labrador is not all in the city. We have so much to offer. Okay, coastal communities, this is the obvious point. I've been given 1 minute, so I have to shift to the conclusion. Okay, so here are the very preliminary conclusions for governance, right? Again, we've tried to trouble this kind of idea of tipping points, or what we might call crossroads, but here's some very preliminary conclusions for governance. The governance challenge is that with the exception of some management of processing licenses through a licensing board, which is quite constrained in its operational, in its options and powers, there is no obvious strategy or policy at the provincial and federal levels in Canada to govern sector development in a way that achieves the goal of equity and community sustainability. But there is nonetheless the need, and I think what we get from this sort of extracting and thinking through critically about tipping point is the following: the need for a strategic approach to seafood processing that takes into account not just issues of recruitment and retention of workers, but also the relationship between processing, small-scale fisheries, coastal communities, and opportunities for diversification, cross-linkages between fisheries processing and other sectors, and not only dominant, but also niche markets. And I think one of the things that the tipping point crowds out is that kind of need. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I have one question. Next presentation, by Madu GALAPPATHTHI on women in governance.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the organizers as well for the opportunity to present. My name is Madu GALAPPATHTHI, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo. So the study. Okay. So the study that I'm going to be presenting today is on how and where women involved in governance, and this is based on a global survey of literature. And this paper was recently published, and I co-authored it with my mentors, Derek and Andrea. So this is the presentation outline, and I will start with a brief introduction to the context and why it matters to bring women into decision making. And then I briefly touch on the methods we followed. And then I'll explain what we learned in terms of the roles that they play currently in this space and the outcomes they achieved. And I will end with what we learned about how we can improve women's involvement in governance. So women make up about 40% of the global SSF workforce, and that's an estimated 45 million women. And they work across the value chains. Yet they are rarely involved in decision making currently, and therefore their interests, their priorities, their issues are left out of all the deliberation processes, and the resulting actions and the decisions further undermine their work and their contributions, and that leads to inequities in gender. And gender inequities, in fact, have gained attention in recent policy frameworks. And we just heard that there's SSF guidelines, and they have made an explicit commitment to address gender inequity and SDG 14.B and the connection between SDG 5. And then in blue justice narratives as well, because women has been, they have been already marginalized. So what place are they going to get in the when they are further marginalizing the ocean sectors in the blue justice narrative? And then some national policies as well are explicitly looking at the fisheries policies to address these gender issues. So what we realized in my work is that there's a critical gap in our understanding about the state of current empirical literature. So what do we know about where women are involved and what they do, and what can we learn from those experiences? So in terms of the methods, we did a systematic scoping review, and we found 54 papers at the intersection of gender, talking about how they involve in governing SSFs. And the theory we brought to understand this is the interactive governance theory. And there's a specific concept that we use to understand, and it's called the concept of governance orders, which help us understand the specific roles that the stakeholders play and their level of engagement. So there are 3 levels to quickly go through. The first one is when stakeholders are involved in just day-to-day management. So enforcing rules, monitoring resources, things like that. And at level 2, they are involved in decision making. So here they have some influence, but then they are working within the existing processes and structures. So therefore some limitations. At level 3, they are engaged in value-based deliberations. And here the values are things that matter to the communities, and the values and meanings that the communities, all the women, everybody holds in general at the community level. So the reason why level 3 is very important is because at that level, if the existing rules are not working, then they can be adjusted, or new rules can be developed in order for them to, for the activities, fishery activities to be fit with the values they hold. So for example, if relations within the community, relationships, taking care of each other is important to them, then that will be a matter that will be discussed at the governance meetings. And then reciprocity, fairness, all those can be values. So that's why level 3 is the most important. So these are the case studies. So we found 54 case studies in the 54 papers that we looked at. Some had multiple cases, but then again, there were some overlaps in the context that they were looking at. So we ended up in total 54 cases. Here in looking at the cases, we looked at, we conceived governance in broad terms. So we looked at formal arrangements as well as informal. So co-management somewhere in the middle, but then a lot of informal spaces were also discussed in literature in ways that women have found spaces to voice their concerns and make change happen. So just two quick random examples to give an idea of what they do. So here in BC, Indigenous women have been able to use their traditional leadership roles to mobilize the community and bring strength. And in this case, to a conflict between the colonial governance system in terms of access to herring fishery. And they managed to restore the community's access through their collective action. And then in Chile, women, they organized into unions, and then they fought for their traditional rights to nearshore resources in order for them to engage in a new economic activity, seaweed aquaculture. And another one from the Asia Pacific side. So Jeju Island is in South Korea. There have been women's organizations, and these are informal groups, very tight work ethics and rules, where they have been able to manage their resources on their own. And these are women's diving groups that has history of about 400 years. So very, very old group that have successfully sustained their activities and their resources. So these are the types of specific tasks that they do in their engagement in these spaces. So what we did was we synthesized a typology, and there are 7. So for example, women perform leadership roles, and although it's like aligned, it's not, the roles that they performed are not aligned. So in each case, women perform multiple roles. And this is just a way to categorize. I have just given examples on this side. So in going through these roles, what we see is across the roles that women have been contributed in these cases as collaborative decision makers. They are social political networkers, and also they are knowledge holders, and they bring their skills, expertise to the common shared problems, and to bring positive outcomes for themselves, their families, and the communities. So after we developed the typology, what we did was we linked it to the orders that I described before. So this is what we ended up with. So the orders, and then, so the tasks were connected to the orders. And then we looked at, we tried to link the orders to the outcomes they achieve. So for example, at the top line, women's engagement in the third order in figuring out new rules of access. For example, in the Chilean fishery, what they achieved was socioeconomic contributions, higher levels of incomes. And there was this specific fishery in the Brazilian Amazon that we looked at. And in that case, women have been newly involved in a new co-management arrangement. And then through that, they had been able to increase their individual incomes by 77%. And this was compared to virtually zero income by the women earned in the communities where there's no co-management arrangement. So like that, there were clear linkages between the roles they performed and the outcomes they contribute to. So when we look at the outcomes side, the question is what sort of outcomes really matter in order for such change to sustain, in order for really equitable, gender equitable outcomes to occur. And what we learned was in cases where there have been tension and women have been able to shed light on the issues and make develop actions and new rules to access resources in ways that they challenge existing power relations, and then those are the instances where they had achieved better outcomes. So what I'm trying to say is, when the approach was gender transformative, the results were very empowering for the women. For example, in the case of Chilean fishery that I mentioned, when women's collective action in those unionized groups made them, brought them empowering experiences where they were sort of spilled over to their household spaces as well. So there was this very popular statement that they have said, where they used to ask for permission to go fishing before, and now they just give notice. They just go and fish. So they exercise their agency, and that way they have achieved very transformative outcomes. So what sort of insights did we gain in order for us to help help integrate women more into the decision-making processes? So obviously, when gender is a topic of discussion in the governance spaces, then there will be, it can bring attention to the women's issues and then help integrate them more into these processes. And in doing so, recognizing informal spaces where they are already active, we found that is very important in order for us to be able to bring women in ways that we don't overload them in terms of their existing workloads, and also to recognize what they have been already doing in the spaces where they are active. And we also saw there's a need to deliberately link their activities with formal instruments, going again to the Chilean case, when there were legal rights given to the women, then the outcomes were better. And like I mentioned, so what we are aiming for is gender equitable outcomes and then challenging power relations for long-term solutions. So that brings to my last point. So can overarching focus on values help advance gender equitable outcomes? And the answer was an overwhelming yes, because the spaces where women are active, their ideas about governance have been shaped in those informal spaces, which hold values, meanings, and principles that are meaningful to the community. So then the change they bring is valuable to the entire community. And And it is also reciprocal through their governance roles. Women themselves, they feel empowered, and they get recognition and high regard within the community, and that helps them further legitimize their actions and help them engage more in the governance processes. So my last point in that regard is we also saw women, the importance of the men's role in recognizing women's effort and starting with the openness to bring them into the spaces where they were previously included, previously excluded, so they can be recognized as legitimized users of the resources, and also their efforts can be recognized for the benefit of all. And that brings us to the end of my presentation, and it's over 20 minutes.
Do you have a question?
Dried fish matters. What is dried fish matters? That's one.
Oh, that's a SHIRK-funded partnership, and that's based on University of Manitoba currently, and it's looking at dried fish social economies in countries, in 6 countries across South and Southeast Asia.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's the processing sector, and yeah, huge social and economic importance to the global South in particular.
Yes, that's good. All right, so our last presentation is Sahir ADVANI, and he's going to be talking about getting the scale of fisheries right. Thank you.
All right, everyone, 15 minutes, and then we can all break and go grab a beer, grab some food, because I'm sure you're just as hungry and tired as I am. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, some formatting issues, so apologies for that. Don't know what happened there. But so in case you can't read it, the title of this talk is Selling Seafood by the Seashore, Getting the Size of the US Direct Seafood Sector Right. Right. So hi, everyone. I'm Sahir ADVANI. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Maine. I'm working as part of a large team with several colleagues at NOAA Fisheries, the US Department of Agriculture, and I've got a list of all the other core team members up here on the slide. The folks that are at the conference, and I'd really recommend that you go talk to them as well, are Joshua Stoll, Sarah Schaufler, she's in the room right here. Sarah, raise your hand. And Patricia Pinto de Silva. Okay, so direct seafood marketing covers a whole range of marketing channels, but broadly speaking, direct seafood marketing can be an approach to marketing where the direct benefits to seafood harvesters through shortened and very traceable supply chains. So Sonia gave a really good example of one particular marketing channel, community sport fisheries, which in North America make up a fair number of the direct seafood sector. But there are these wide range of other marketing channels that folks are engaging with. And so these include really simple examples of someone just selling direct off their boat, to someone selling it at farmers markets or to restaurants and online sales, etc. There are also other processes where folks are selling to wholesalers who then identify that seafood harvesters catch as their own. Now, this has been talked about a lot today, but there has been, in the wake of the COVID-19 and over the course of this pandemic, there's been this bump in direct seafood sales. A lot of folks in the northeast of the US switched to direct seafood marketing as a way to adapt to the disruptions to global seafood systems. Even earlier today, Maria was talking about how the folks in the Magdalen Islands also switched to direct seafood sales in order to sell lobster to local communities. And so direct seafood sales have proven to be a source of resilience for local food systems as well as local seafood systems. But not enough is known about them. And so it's really important to collect more data on what exactly is the size and the diversity of the direct seafood sector. So this study in particular is looking at the seafood sector in the United States. And we're collecting this data because it really will provide important insights into the employment and the economic contributions of the sector, but it'll also highlight the regional trends in marketing practices. Even just earlier today, it was highlighted that there are vast differences in, say, the way the markets are operating on the Atlantic coast of Canada versus the western coast of Canada, Pacific coast. Moreover, as I'll demonstrate later on in this talk, understanding the size of the direct seafood sector can help agencies such as NOAA Fisheries or the USDA or other agencies as well, help justify investment through grants, technical assistance, as well as policies that facilitate the growth and development of the sector. So NOAA Fisheries has been collecting data about commercial fisheries and recreational fisheries for quite a while now. And this data has helped identify the number of jobs, the economic value of it, as well as the value-added aspects of it. And broadly, they are able to distinguish between, say, the commercial sector and the recreational sector. Even within their accounting for the commercial sector, they are lumping in the commercial fishing sector as well as the seafood industry. So everything beyond the fishing boat. But again, it's slightly lumped together. And so it's been hard to distinguish this data very easily, or it's not often found in reports. And again, what is advantageous is that NOAA Fisheries has been collecting this data for a while. And so you can see trends over time across these various dimensions, both for the commercial fishing sector and the seafood industry, as well as the recreational fishing sector. And I'm stressing upon the fact about the recreational fishing sector, because that's also meant that there have been policies that have enabled the growth of the recreational fishing industry alongside the growth of the commercial fishing industry. And so this has important implications when you're considering governance of the commons, governance of seafood systems, and governance of what counts of how food is valued as fish versus food as money, or fish as money. Now, on the flip side, you also have the United States Department of Agriculture. And so they've been monitoring local food marketing practices. While the USDA has been conducting a national census on just farm sales and agricultural outputs, they've also, in more recent years, so first one was in 2015 and more recently in 2020, they've been conducting national surveys of local food marketing practices. This data has been valuable for the United States, particularly for the agricultural sector and the local food sector, by identifying regional trends and regional shares of income from direct agricultural sales, and also in terms of highlighting the volume and economic value through these different marketing channels. Moreover, this has then helped the USDA invest in this sector more directly, and has really further strengthened these local and regional agricultural systems. So why can't we do the same for fisheries? Why can't we do the same for direct seafood in the United States? Now, we know a little bit about direct seafood marketing in the US and in Canada through the Local Catch Network, which is a community of practice where, again, it is, and particularly the Seafood Finder, is a voluntary database for folks in the sector to basically share their profile on this platform so they connect to local communities in their area or even across the country. If you are in the market for locally and sustainably sourced seafood, I would recommend you check out this link and find seafood that supports fishing communities near you. But again, this is voluntary data, and this is probably capturing a fraction of what's out there in terms of all the innovation, all of the direct seafood marketing strategies that folks are engaging in. And so we need a better accounting for this. So I'm going to be talking about a method that's currently underway, where we're trying to assess the size of the US direct seafood sector. It involves two broad phases, and I'm going to be mostly focusing on this first phase. And that's a short questionnaire sent to all the commercial seafood harvesters in the United States. And so it's active right now. The survey is out the door. The mails are being sent out across the United States. And we're asking a pretty broad question. And that is, do you directly market your catch? And of course, we are asking about the different marketing channels involved and so on and so forth. And the idea is that once we've contacted all the commercial seafood harvesters across the US, we can identify those or let them identify themselves, and then potentially survey them again in a larger or in a more complete survey, which really gets at their marketing practices, which tries to identify the regional trends, and also gets greater insights into the different strategies being used. And so that full survey is going to be launched in January or maybe it's spring 2023. But what we're trying to do is basically identify commercial seafood harvesters in the first stage and then contact them again later on. So, still talking about the short questionnaire. There is no comprehensive database of seafood harvesters in the United States. This data is stored in various data warehouses across the US. And so part of the major legwork for the current phase of the research was gathering all of this data together. Because of the pandemic and the bump in seafood sales, and a lot of folks switching to direct seafood marketing, the state of Rhode Island introduced an entirely new license category just to allow folks to sell seafood directly. But just we didn't capture that bump and miss what the baseline of the industry was, we're using 2019 as the baseline for the study. And so again, contacting these large data warehouses, engaging in data sharing agreements with pretty much every single state across the US, and also then utilizing existing data on direct marketing licenses for those states that do collect and maintain that data in either publicly accessible data databases or else in databases where you request for the data. And again, because just the diversity of seafood marketing practices that are there in the US, the differences in terminologies that might be used in, say, Alaska versus Florida, we conducted 5 focus groups with the direct seafood marketing sector in the US. We had 26 participants from 5 US states, and ultimately the aim was to understand the diversity of terms being used, because one person's direct seafood marketing was not another person's direct seafood marketing. Some folks said there was true blue direct marketing, and other folks were like, well, what that guy's doing doesn't count. So we really wanted to capture that diversity because ultimately we wanted a survey that would be approachable to every single person across the US, a standardizable survey that was contextualized to match local knowledge or local terminology. And ultimately, we created 7 questions and then we're currently distributing them to the mail, and they can also access an online survey. So if you're ever wondering what 32,000 surveys look like, that's what it is. So yeah, so we've got a database of nearly 40,000 commercial seafood harvesters. We have postal addresses for all of them and emails for some. What we're finding is that at least this is the map of how seafood harvesters are distributed across the states for the questionnaire that we're contacting them. And this includes some states have federal and state permit data, and some states are only federal, are only data for federal fisheries, and I'll explain why in a second. So some states like Alaska have a separate category for direct seafood marketers. They're called direct marketers. Oregon and California and Washington, they also have these categories. So we've got that data, and that's kind of given us a leg up in terms of moving the survey forwards. And we've also then worked with different state fisheries departments to further drill down through their license categories to identify folks who would count in this category. Now, the implications are that from this survey, we should be able to be in a position to again account for all these different marketing channels, as well as their contributions to the sector, to the income, to the economy of in this particular region, as well as the revenue and the added value, right? And this could be a survey that could go on every couple of years to again build temporal trends. At the end of the day, a survey such as this is of benefit to the direct seafood sector, because one, it would highlight marketing channels that potentially work or that have been effective, as well as regional strategies that can really tap into local consumer needs. And another thing that I'd really like to highlight here is that this is a unique collaboration between government agencies, academics, and the community of the seafood industry. And so we're all learning from each other in terms of what works and what doesn't, and what strategies need to be employed in different contexts. So the question I'd like to pose and leave you with is, wouldn't it be awesome to also conduct a similar survey for the Canadian direct seafood sector? And so, yeah, I'm going to end here, but basically, I'd like to acknowledge a whole bunch of people, particularly colleagues from the different agencies, Fisheries, USDA, and I'd really want to give a big shout out to the University of Maine Mail and Print Services. I've been badgering them for months, and it's finally out there. Again, this is what 32,000 mailed surveys look like. And a big shout out to all of the folks who've been helping with the data assistance from the data warehouses.
So this ends the session, but if folks would like to stay a few minutes and ask a question, so.
Yeah, I can speak, yeah. So here, is there a hypothesis that you want to test, but maybe not at this stage, but that, using the farm world as a context for it, some people say that the local agroecology, production system at small scale can actually substitute or supplant the corporate model there. And I think that's a hypothesis to test, but is that also what you're interested in, trying to at least create a context to be able to then test that hypothesis?
Yes, so there are several hypotheses that we're trying to test. One that's coming straight to my mind is, again, in terms of different seafood types, let's say frozen versus fresh seafood, does any particular type of seafood lend it a direct market advantage? Is it easier to directly market frozen or canned seafood versus something not as stable, such as fresh seafood? Or does fresh seafood have an advantage? So that's one hypothesis off the top of my head.
I have a few questions. Sorry, I'll quick. I was wondering if you had looked at aquaculture products. That's one thing. And the other thing I would just say related to that is during COVID in my neck of the woods in Connecticut, we had a lot of folks who grow shellfish, like specifically oysters, and the restaurant market had disappeared. And so they started direct marketing kind of like pop-ups everywhere. And so I was wondering if you captured that. And then kind of related to that is that to do that kind of retailing, you need a HACCP certificate. And so it makes me wonder if there wasn't kind of a black market or some illegal activity that might be really hard to capture. Because I would imagine a lot of those folks don't have that. I don't mean to disparage it, but just wondering.
Oh, those are some great questions. So the aquaculture question. So the USDA does conduct a census of aquaculture. And so we felt that was not worthwhile to reinvent the wheel. So we're not focusing on the aquaculture sector in particular. On the black market front, well, I don't know. Well, we're focusing on legal licensed seafood harvesters. And yeah, that's what we're focusing on.
Well, harvesters might be legal. I'm just thinking the marketing of that. That's where it would happen. I'm not.
Oh, yeah.
Effectively legal. I was suggesting that there are certain licenses needed to sell it.
Yeah.
For help.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that might be tricky to capture. Yeah.
So here, I have a question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same question about the potential for unreported landing.
Yes,
in the
yeah.
market, and whether that becomes a constraint on your response levels, your survey, people don't wanna.
For sure, but then again, when we don't even know what's reported or well enough what's reported in the sector, it's hard to compare apples and oranges then, right? May as well have a better understanding of the reported direct seafood sector and then say, you know what, let's strengthen this further and potentially squeeze out the black market. Gotcha.
Just a question, because I am curious. This direct sale are the cod fish or just the transformed fish?
Everything. So
Because
from,
in France it's forbidden to sell directly fillets. Fishers can sell, they can sell the cod fish, but not.
right, so there are different states have different permits. And so in some places it's, it has to be just hair, you can sell head and gutted. In other cases, you can only sell frozen fillets. And so again, state by state permits, yeah. I would recommend folks attend 4.2 if you're really interested in hearing more about the direct seafood sector. We've got a whole range of speakers talking about this, including Sonia, including Kevin, including Josh, and myself. Yeah.
One more question. for
Yes.
Lisa
All
here.
right.
Does your survey also have something about asking the respondents, what would enhance your, your capacity? Is there such a question there?
We are still developing the final survey. And so we would love input to help improve the survey. Yeah.
Folks, thank you so much. We're having a reception, so please continue the discussion.